The most dangerous man in any room is the one with nothing to prove. 3 men block a hallway, each one a trained killer. They corner a single man after a private demonstration at a military club in San Diego. One leans against the door. Another rolls up his sleeves. The leader steps forward and whispers, "Forget the cameras. Forget the fans. You're about to experience real violence." The man they have trapped is Bruce Lee. He does not run. He does not raise his voice. He shifts his stance. And the air in that hallway changes. What happens next takes 11 seconds. 3 Navy SEALs. 3 of the most lethal men in the United States military. Not one lands a single strike. But what did Bruce Lee say to the leader that haunted him for the rest of his life? Stay with me. This story is worth every second. Now, to understand what happened in that hallway, you need to understand something about San Diego in 1971. The military ran that city. Not officially, but if you lived there, you knew. The bars, the gyms, the social clubs, everything revolved around the bases. And inside those bases, there was a pecking order. Regular soldiers at the bottom, officers in the middle, and at the very top, sitting in a category all by themselves, were the SEALs. These were not ordinary men. Now get this. Navy SEALs in 1971 were not the celebrity warriors you see on magazine covers today. Back then, most Americans had never even heard the name. Their missions were classified. Their training was classified. Even the injuries they carried home were classified. They existed in a shadow, and they liked it that way. It gave them power. The kind of power that comes from knowing you can do things most people cannot even imagine. And among these men, hand-to-hand combat was not just a skill. It was a religion. They trained in judo. They trained in boxing. They trained in techniques pulled from wars most governments refused to acknowledge. Every one of them had been in situations where a weapon jammed or a knife was lost, and the only thing standing between life and death was what their bare hands could do. They were proud of this. Believe me, they had earned the right to be. So when word spread through the base that a martial artist from Hollywood was coming to San Diego to give a private demonstration at the officers' club, the reaction was exactly what you would expect. Mockery. Pure, unfiltered mockery. Bruce Lee, the guy from the television show, the guy who threw fancy kicks in front of cameras, the guy who had never, as far as any of them knew, been in a real fight in his life. That was the word going around. Hollywood actor. Trained dancer, pretender. Now here is the thing. 3 SEALs in particular took this harder than most. Their names do not matter yet. What matters is what they were. The first was a grappling specialist. 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle built not in a gym but in combat zones. He had choked men unconscious in places the map does not name. The second was a striking expert. Former Golden Gloves boxer before he enlisted. Fast hands. Devastating power. He had broken jaws in bar fights just to stay sharp. The third was the leader. Quieter than the other 2. Smaller. But everyone on the base knew he was the most dangerous of the 3. He had a reputation. The kind of reputation that does not come from stories. It comes from the way other dangerous men go silent when he walks into a room. These 3 made a bet. A simple one. They said no civilian could last 30 seconds against men who had killed with their bare hands in the dark. No matter how famous. No matter how many movies he had made. 30 seconds. That was the number. The demonstration happened on a Tuesday evening. Bruce Lee arrived at the officers' club around 6. He was smaller than most of them expected. 5'7", 140 pounds. He wore a simple black shirt and dark trousers. No flashy outfit. No entourage. Just him and a quiet confidence that some of the officers later described as unsettling. He performed for about 40 minutes. And this is where the story shifts. Because what those military men saw in that room was not what they expected. It was not fancy kicks and Hollywood choreography. It was speed. Real speed. The kind that makes your brain stutter because your eyes cannot process what just happened. He struck a pad held by a volunteer, and the man holding it stumbled backward 3 full steps. He demonstrated a 1-inch punch that sent a 200-pound Marine into a chair. He moved in ways that did not match anything in their training manuals. The room was quiet when he finished. Not the polite quiet of applause winding down. The uncomfortable quiet of men realizing they may have been wrong about something. But 3 men in the back of the room were not quiet inside. They were burning, because what Bruce Lee had just done in front of their fellow servicemen had made their skills look ordinary. And for men who built their entire identity on being extraordinary, that was not just an insult. It was a threat. The demonstration ended. The crowd thinned. Officers shook hands, said their goodbyes, and drifted toward the parking lot. Bruce Lee stayed behind to speak with a colonel who had questions about training methods. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Then Lee excused himself, thanked the colonel, and headed toward the back hallway that led to the rear exit. That hallway, remember it, because that is where everything changes. He turned the corner, and there they were, 3 men, waiting. The grappler stood to the left, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The boxer stood to the right, rolling his neck slowly, the way fighters do when they are loosening up for something. And the leader stood dead center, directly in front of the rear exit door. Blocking it, Bruce Lee stopped walking. He did not step backward. He did not look around for another way out. He simply stopped. And he looked at all 3 of them, one at a time, slowly, the way a man reads a room before deciding what it is. The leader spoke first. His voice was low, controlled. That was a nice show back there. He paused. But we are not officers looking for a weekend hobby. We do this for real, every day, in places you will never see. Bruce Lee said nothing. The leader took 1 step closer. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to show us what you actually have. No pads, no volunteers, no audience clapping for you. Just us. Now here is the thing. Most people, when faced with 3 men like this in a closed hallway, experience something very specific. The body floods with adrenaline. The hands shake. The mind starts calculating exits and odds and whether screaming for help is worth the humiliation. That is the normal human response. And these SEALs knew it. They had seen it dozens of times. In prisoners, in targets, in men who thought they were tough until the moment arrived and their bodies betrayed them. But Bruce Lee did not do any of that. And that is the detail that every account of this night agrees on. He did not shake. He did not scan for exits. He did not even blink faster. What he did was shift his weight. Just slightly. His left foot moved about 2 inches forward. His right hand dropped to his side, loose, open. His chin lowered maybe half an inch. That was it. That was all he did. And the grappler later said that in that single moment, something changed in the hallway that he could not explain. He said it felt like the temperature dropped. Not physically, but something shifted. The energy reversed. 1 second they were 3 predators cornering prey. The next second it did not feel that way anymore. The boxer moved first. He was used to being fast. He threw a straight right hand aimed directly at Lee's jaw. It was a clean, practiced punch. The kind that had dropped men in bars and in boxing rings and in back alleys on 3 continents. Fast. Committed. Final. It hit nothing. Bruce Lee was not there. He had moved to the left, just barely, just enough, and the boxer's fist cut through empty air. Before the boxer could reset, Lee's foot swept his front leg. Not a big, dramatic kick. A short, sharp sweep at the ankle. The boxer went down sideways. His shoulder hit the tile floor hard. The sound echoed through the hallway. The grappler reacted on instinct. He lunged forward, arms wide, going for the clinch. This was his world. Get hold of a man, take him down, and it is over. He had done it hundreds of times. His hands reached for Lee's shoulders. They never got there. Bruce Lee stepped inside the reach, drove his forearm into the grappler's chest, and redirected the man's momentum into the wall. The grappler hit it sideways. His head bounced off the plaster. He slid down to one knee, dazed, trying to understand what had just happened. 11 seconds. That is how long it took. 2 men down. Neither one had landed a single touch. The leader had not moved. He stood by the door, watching. And now, for the first time, something crossed his face that his training had never prepared him for. Doubt. He looked at the boxer on the floor. He looked at the grappler on one knee against the wall. He looked at Bruce Lee, who stood exactly where the fight had started, breathing normally, hands still open, stance still relaxed. As if nothing had happened. As if 11 seconds of dismantling 2 elite combat specialists was no different from pouring a glass of water. The leader did something unexpected then. He raised both hands, palms out. The universal sign. Enough. All right, he said. His voice was steady, but the edge was gone. All right, I see it. Bruce Lee looked at him, and for a moment the hallway was still. The boxer sat up slowly, holding his shoulder. The grappler pulled himself to his feet using the wall. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. It felt, for just a second, like the whole thing was over, like the storm had passed and reason had returned. Like 3 proud men had been humbled and that was the end of it. But it was not the end of it. Believe me, because what happened next is the part that nobody expected. Not the SEALs. Not Bruce Lee. Not anyone. A door opened at the far end of the hallway, and a voice came through it. Loud, sharp, full of authority. What is going on in here? Colonel David Mercer. The man who had organized the demonstration. The man who had personally invited Bruce Lee to the officers' club. The man who, at that very moment, was looking at 2 of his SEALs picking themselves off the floor and a third standing by the exit with his hands raised like a man who had just been caught doing something he could not explain. Now here is the thing. This changed everything. Because this was no longer a private hallway scuffle between 3 soldiers and a martial artist. The moment a ranking officer walked in, it became an incident. A military incident. On a military installation, involving active-duty SEALs and a civilian guest who had been personally invited by command. The leader of the 3 SEALs understood this immediately. You could see it in his face. The doubt that had appeared moments ago was replaced by something worse. Fear. Not the kind that comes from physical danger. The kind that comes from realizing your career, your reputation, and your future just walked into the room wearing colonel's insignia. Colonel Mercer looked at the boxer, who was now on his feet but favoring his right shoulder. He looked at the grappler, who had a red mark spreading across the side of his face where it had hit the wall. He looked at Bruce Lee, who stood calmly in the center of the hallway, untouched. Someone talk, Mercer said. Right now. Silence. The 3 SEALs said nothing. And this is where Bruce Lee made a choice that changed the entire nature of what was happening. He could have told the truth. He could have said these men cornered me, threatened me, and I defended myself. That would have been accurate. That would have been justified. And that would have ended the careers of 3 Navy SEALs on the spot. He did not say that. Bruce Lee looked at the colonel and said, "We were having a discussion about technique. Things got a little enthusiastic. No harm done. Get this." He covered for them. The man they had trapped. The man they had threatened. The man they had called a pretender and a showman. He looked a colonel in the eye and lied to protect the men who had just tried to humiliate him. The grappler stared at Lee. The boxer stared at Lee. The leader stared at Lee. None of them said a word. Colonel Mercer was not a fool. He had been in the military for 22 years. He could read a room the way a mechanic reads an engine. He knew something had happened. But he also knew that Bruce Lee was giving him an exit. Clean one. No paperwork. No investigation. No scandal involving his SEALs and the guest he had personally vouched for. Fine, Mercer said. He pointed at the 3 SEALs. You 3. My office. 0700 tomorrow. Then he looked at Lee. Mr. Lee, I apologize if the evening ran longer than expected. I will have someone escort you to your car. Bruce Lee nodded. That will not be necessary. Thank you, Colonel. Mercer held his gaze for a moment, then turned and walked back through the door he had come from. And now it was just the four of them again. But the hallway felt completely different. The power had shifted so far that it was almost disorienting. Three SEALs who had walked in as predators now stood in the silence of men who had just been saved by the person they tried to destroy. The boxer spoke first. His voice was low and rough. "Why did you do that?" Bruce Lee looked at him. "Because ending your career would not prove anything I have not already proven in the last 15 seconds. That landed. Believe me, that landed." The boxer looked at the floor. The grappler leaned back against the wall and exhaled slowly, like a man releasing something heavy he had been carrying in his chest. But the leader did not look away. He stood there, eyes locked on Bruce Lee, and something was building behind those eyes. Not anger, not anymore. Something deeper. Something that a man like him, a man who had spent his entire adult life being the most dangerous person in every room he entered, had never been forced to feel before. He was ashamed. And for a man who had built his identity on strength and control, shame was more dangerous than any punch Bruce Lee could have thrown. Because shame does not fade when the bruises heal. Shame rewrites the story you tell yourself about who you are. The leader took one step forward, and he said something that nobody in that hallway expected. Something that turned a confrontation into something else entirely. "Teach me." 2 words. That was all. But those 2 words cracked open a door that would lead to one of the most unlikely relationships in Bruce Lee's life. And it would cost him more than he could have imagined. Bruce Lee did not answer immediately. He stood in that hallway, looking at the leader, and something passed between them that the other 2 SEALs could feel but could not name. It was recognition. The kind that only happens between men who have both walked through something most people never will. "You do not want me to teach you how to fight," Lee said quietly. "You already know how to fight. That is not your problem." The leader frowned. "Then what is my problem?" "You fight to prove something. That is why you lost tonight. Not because you are slow. Not because you are weak. You lost because the moment I shifted my stance, you hesitated. And you hesitated because somewhere inside you, before the first move was even made, you already knew." "Knew what?" "That what you came here to prove was never true. Now get this." That sentence did something to the leader that no amount of combat training had ever done. It broke through. Not like a punch breaks through a guard. Like water breaks through a crack in stone. Slowly, deeply, permanently. The leader's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled into fists. Not to swing, to hold on. Like a man gripping the edge of something he is about to fall from. "I have killed men," the leader said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I have done things in the service of this country that I cannot talk about. I have bled for this. And you are telling me that none of it matters." Bruce Lee shook his head. "I am telling you that all of it matters. Every mission, every scar, every night you could not sleep. It all matters. But it does not make you invincible. And tonight, for the first time, you know that. That is not a weakness. That is the beginning of real strength." The hallway was completely silent. The boxer and the grappler stood motionless, watching this exchange like men witnessing something they did not fully understand but knew they would never forget. And then the leader did something that, according to every version of this story, shocked everyone present, including Bruce Lee. He bowed. Not a casual nod. Not a half-hearted gesture. A full, deep bow. The kind that a student gives to a master. The kind that a warrior gives to a man he recognizes as his superior. This was a Navy SEAL. A man who had never bowed to anyone outside of a formal military ceremony. And he was bowing to a 5'7" civilian in a black shirt in a hallway in San Diego. Bruce Lee bowed back. The same depth. The same respect. No higher. No lower. Equal. And that was the moment. That was the real payoff of this entire story. Not the fight. Not the 11 seconds. Not the speed or the technique. The payoff was this. A man who was trained to fear nothing finally met the one thing his training could not prepare him for. And instead of being destroyed by it, he was changed by it. The leader straightened up. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. He looked at Bruce Lee and said, "What do I do now?" And Bruce Lee said the 5 words that would haunt this man for the rest of his life. 5 words that he would repeat to his son decades later. 5 words that he would ask to have read at his own funeral. Violence is never the answer. Now, if this story has held you this far, I want to ask you something. Take a moment. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for yourself. Because stories like this one do not come along every day. And when you subscribe, you make sure the next one finds you. That is all I ask. One tap, and we continue. The leader exhaled. It was a long, slow breath. The kind you take when something inside you finally lets go. He nodded once. Then he stepped away from the door, clearing the exit for the first time since the confrontation began. Bruce Lee straightened the collar of his shirt. He looked at the grappler, who dropped his gaze. He looked at the boxer, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect. Then he looked at the leader one more time. "You are not the first men to test me," Lee said, "and you will not be the last. But most men who do never ask the question you just asked. Remember that." He walked through the door, unhurried, untouched, unbroken. The sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor, through the rear exit, and into the San Diego night. And the 3 SEALs stood in that empty hallway, under the humming fluorescent lights, in a silence that none of them would ever fully be able to describe. The grappler was the first to leave. He pushed off the wall without a word, walked past the other 2, and disappeared through the far door. He drove back to the base that night and did not speak to anyone for 2 days. The men in his unit noticed. They asked if something had happened. He said no. But something had happened. Something he would carry quietly for years. He never told the full story to anyone on the base. But he stopped picking fights off duty. He stopped volunteering for the most dangerous assignments just to prove he could survive them. The men who knew him before that night and after said he became calmer, more careful, less interested in being feared and more interested in being precise. He never used the word humility. Men like him did not use words like that. But that is what it was. The boxer took longer to process it. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for almost an hour after the hallway cleared. His shoulder ached from the fall. His pride ached worse. He had been the fastest man on his team. He had built his confidence around speed and power. And in that hallway, for the first time in his life, he had thrown his best shot and hit nothing but air. That stays with a man. Believe me, that stays with a man. He replayed the moment over and over. The punch leaving his hand. The absolute certainty that it would land. And then the emptiness. The air where a jaw should have been. The floor coming up to meet him. He told a friend about it 6 months later, after enough drinks to loosen the story out of him. The friend laughed. The boxer did not. "You do not understand," he said. "I was not outfought. I was shown that fighting was the wrong answer to begin with. And I have been thinking about that every single day since. But the leader is the one the story is really about. Not Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee already knew who he was before he walked into that hallway. He had already done the work, already faced the fear, already conquered the need to prove himself to other men. The leader had not. And that is why those 5 words hit him the way they did. Violence is never the answer. He reported to Colonel Mercer's office at 7 the next morning, as ordered. The colonel kept it brief. He told the 3 of them that whatever had happened in that hallway, it would not appear in any official record. He said that Bruce Lee had personally requested that the incident be left alone. He said that if any of them ever put a civilian guest in that position again, they would not just lose their trident. They would lose everything. Then he dismissed them. The leader walked out of that office and went straight to the base gym. He did not lift weights. He did not hit the bag. He sat on a bench in the corner and stayed there for 45 minutes. A man who had never sat still for 45 minutes in his life. Something was working through him. Something that had started in that hallway and was not finished yet. Over the following weeks, he began to change. Not in ways that were obvious at first. He still trained, still deployed, still performed at the level expected of a man in his position. But he asked fewer questions designed to prove he was the smartest man in the room. He stopped testing the new recruits with unnecessary aggression. He began listening more than talking, and when he fought in training, his movements were different. Less force, more control, as if the objective was no longer to dominate but to understand. His teammates noticed. Some of them respected it. Some of them thought he was going soft. He did not care, because he had seen something in that hallway that they had not. He had seen a man who possessed more physical power than anyone he had ever encountered, and that man had chosen not to use it. That choice, that restraint, that was the thing his training had never covered. His entire career had been built on the idea that strength is defined by what you can do to another person. Bruce Lee showed him, in 11 seconds and 5 words, that strength is defined by what you choose not to do. He tried to find Bruce Lee after that night. He wrote a letter to the address of Lee's martial arts school in Los Angeles. The letter was short. It said thank you. It said that he understood now. It said that the bow in the hallway was the most honest thing he had ever done. He never received a reply. He did not expect one. 2 years later, in 1973, Bruce Lee died. He was 32 years old. The leader heard the news on a Tuesday afternoon. He was on base. A radio in the break room. He stood up from his chair, walked outside, and stood in the sun for a long time. He did not cry, but something closed inside him that day. A door that had been opened in a hallway in San Diego shut quietly and permanently. He served for another 12 years. Retired with full honors. Moved to a small town in Virginia. Married a woman who taught high school history. Had a son. Named him David after the colonel who had kept the story out of the record. He never spoke about that night publicly. Not once. No interviews. No book deals. No dramatic retellings at dinner parties. When people asked him about his career, about the missions and the danger and the things he had seen, he would give them the standard answers. Brief, professional, closed. But there was one story he kept separate from all the rest. One story that he held in a different part of himself. Not the soldier part, the human part. Years later, when his body had slowed and his knees reminded him every morning of what they had endured, he started writing things down. Not a memoir, not for publication, just notes. Pages of thoughts in a leather journal he kept in the drawer beside his bed. Most of those pages were about strategy, about leadership, about the mistakes he had made and the lessons he wished he had learned sooner. But one page was different. One page had only 6 lines on it. At the top, in careful handwriting, it read, San Diego, 1971. Below that, I went looking for a fight and found a teacher. Below that, he beat 3 of us in 11 seconds. Below that, then he saved our careers. Below that, then he said 5 words I will never forget. And at the bottom of the page, violence is never the answer. And on the wall of his study, in a simple black frame, he kept a photograph. Not a military photograph. Not a commendation or a medal. A photograph of Bruce Lee. The same one you have probably seen. Black and white. Lee standing in a relaxed stance, hands at his sides, looking directly into the camera with those eyes that carry no anger, no ego, only certainty. His son asked him about it once. He was maybe 12 years old. Dad, who is that? The leader looked at the photograph. Then he looked at his son, and he told him. He told him the whole story, the demonstration, the hallway, the 11 seconds, the bow, the 5 words. He told it slowly, carefully, the way a man tells a story he has carried for decades and never once told wrong. When he finished, his son was quiet for a moment. Then the boy said, "Did you ever see him again?" "No," the leader said. "He died before I got the chance. Are you sad about that?" The leader sat down. He put his hand on his son's shoulder. And he said something that, to me, is the real ending of this story. I am not sad that I never saw him again. I am grateful that I saw him at all. Because most men go their whole lives without meeting someone who shows them the truth about themselves. I met that man in a hallway when I was 29 years old. And every good decision I have made since then started in that moment. His son looked at the photograph one more time. Then he looked back at his father. Violence is never the answer? The leader smiled. For the first time in this entire story, the leader smiled. That is right, son. That is the only thing worth knowing. The most dangerous man in any room is the one with nothing to prove. And now you know why.